Hello, in this video we're going to talk about how to make a walk cycle in Flash. A cycle of animation is something that can repeat seamlessly. So even though this might only be 10 frames of animation, when it's done, we can repeat it as many times as we need. So it's actually really flexible. And it's also a good foundation piece in animation. It's not so much a foundation in Flash because it's actually a little bit more advanced. We're not going to be using any motion tweens. We're going to actually be hand manipulating each keyframe. So it's a little bit tricky. There's a few things we could do to make our life a little easier. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we start with a simple character. I drew this character as a solid shape. And then what I did after that is I broke down each piece that I need to animate. So to do a convincing walk cycle animation, at the very least, you need to have an arm. You can see here I did the arms separate. You could break these down even further. So we could have just the upper arm as one piece, the lower arm as another piece, and the hand as another one. But I found for the walk cycle you actually don't really need to do that because it's pretty much in the same position the whole time. So the legs, however, you absolutely have to break down. You have to break it down into first you got to do the pelvis because you need to have this shape back here that always will hide all the white space. That piece never moves in your animation. It's basically just there as a shield so you can't see any weird pops or anything when the leg is moving. Then you need an upper leg portion, lower leg, and then the foot itself. All of these are going to be moved separately. So for convincing animation you have to break that down like that. The body and the head are also broke down independently so they can move independent as well. So that's pretty much it. So start with your drawing and then simply it wouldn't even hurt to really draw on layers. So when you're drawing your character, first draw the body, then draw the arm. You know what I mean? Draw on like layers so that you can easily make each of these a symbol later on. The next thing we have to get ready is our pivot points. The pivot points are these little circles right here. So the way we can manipulate them, and I think a better way to show that is actually start fresh. So I'm going to actually make a new symbol here. And we're going to call this pivot, right? And I'm just going to make a simple sphere guy here. Alright, I'm going to go back to my scene now. We're going to drag this into here. Now, by default, when I rotate this new symbol, you can see it's rotating on the center axis. And that's fine for, default, and that's probably okay for a lot of stuff that you want to animate. But when we're doing body parts, that makes it kind of tricky. So what we want to do is just drag this little white dot here to where we'd want our pivot to be, and then when we go back and animate, you can see now it's animating from a different pivot point. It's really that simple. So that is the same for our body parts here. So you can see here, if I double click on this, get to my symbols here, you can see it's the same thing. I can click and drag this, move this pivot point anywhere I want to, but it's set pretty good where it is now. You can see I can move the arm and it moves like an arm should move, and that's important for when you're animating. Okay, so the next thing, there's two ways of handling the legs. You can actually do what they call nested symbols. So what that means is I can sit here and I can make three symbols for this leg. The first symbol will have all three parts in it. Okay, the second symbol will just have these two parts in it, and the final symbol will just have his foot. And the reason that you do this, because as it is right now, if I were to animate this upper leg here, like I tried to do with the arm, you could see that the other parts don't follow it. So by using the nested symbols, you can achieve that. However, it's very tricky to set up, and it's actually overly complicated for what we're trying to do, because we're not going to be actually doing any motion tweening. If we were doing motion tweening, that would make a lot more sense. But since we're going to be hand keying this character, it's really not that big a deal for us to just move these legs into place after the fact. It's actually pretty quick. There's only going to be 10 frames of animation for this guy total, so it's not too bad. Okay, so the next thing to make your life easier when animating a character like this is to use what they call the Preston Blair walk cycle cheat sheet here. And you can see here it's giving us all the keyframes. So all we're going to want to do is position our character kind of like how he has it. The main important thing to note is when we're using a Preston Blair walk cycle is that the key points where the limbs are is, you know, how this foot is planted right here, how he's coming down here to show weight. You know, those are the important factors. The angle of the body isn't so much of an issue. If you look at our character, for example, I have him more vertically oriented, but everything else I'm pretty confident is good enough for the first frame of the Preston Blair walk cycle. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to hand keyframe all the way up to here. And the reason we're only going to go to here is because once it gets to this frame here, this is actually the same frame as the first one, it's just flipped around. So when we get to this point, we're going to copy this layer, or I'm sorry, this frame over, okay, to here, and just flip the limbs around. And that'll make sense later. Okay, so now it's worth pointing out that my guy here, he's actually keyframed the same as this frame right here. It's exactly the same as this first frame, just the limbs are flipped. So I'm going to be starting from that frame. So the next thing I'm going to do is just pop in a ground here, which is just simply a line on a new layer. The reason for doing this is so that my foot placement is always correct and it doesn't, you know, go through the ground or anything weird like that. The weight of the character is all going to rely on how well his feet are planted, so that's actually crucial to have that down. And what I'll do is just throw a little lock on that so I don't accidentally select it. Okay, so now we're going to copy all these frames to the next. So we just do that by selecting all of them vertically. Right click, copy. Okay, and then we're just going to paste them all in here like this. Oops. First I select all the empty frames vertical, so it's all blue like that. And then I paste in. If you don't do that, okay, if you don't paste in all the frames like that, it'll only do the first layer. Like if I just right clicked on here on this frame and I went to paste frames, it would just do the first layer. So we want to make sure we don't do that. And now I'm just going to do it again, because I told you I'm going to be working on every other frame. So now I'm going to do the next frame here. And this is the frame I'm going to be working on. Okay, so now I'm just going to position this guy. The first thing normally that I like to do is move the body height. Okay, but in this case, if you can see here on this frame, which is the one I'm essentially doing, the body height is pretty much identical to this first guy here. He's standing up a little bit more vertical and his head is also up a little bit more, but the actual height of the body, if you go here to the bottom of the pelvis here, it's actually the same exact height. So now I'm just going to start manipulating my character and getting him to how I want him. Like I said before, because, you know, we're not making nested symbols, when I go to rotate this guy, we're going to get a little, we're going to lose our pivot. But it's no big deal, because we're actually went the wrong way. It's no big deal because we're actually just going to move them into place manually. Okay, I'm just going to check my animation. Now it's very subtle, just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to move down and work on the legs a little bit. The legs are by far the trickiest part. This could get real tricky. But, you know, you just take your time. Okay, and those are pretty good. That's pretty close to how I want it. Now I'm just going to do the arms. The arms are actually pretty easy to move. comparison to the feet, because you don't have to worry about getting them to line up like you do on the ground with the feet, for example. Move this to about there. Even though you can't see, I'm referencing the Preston Blair cheat sheet on another screen, so I get my placement right. Okay, and that's pretty good.